Hello, and welcome to video 2 of the Introduction to Fly Tying series. Today we're going to talk about vices. So, this is a vise right here. In particular, this is a true rotary vise, and I'll get more into that here in a minute. But basically, be your vise a traditional vise or a true rotary vise, you're going to have 6 main components. And they are the base, the stem, the head, the vise jaws, the adjusting screw for your vise jaws, and your tightening screw for your vise jaws. So let's start with the base. You can have, for your base, you have 2 options. You can have a pedestal vise, like this one that I have, or you can have a C-clamp. And basically what a C-clamp does is it allows you to clamp to a desk or a bench or table and then run your stem into that clamp and then tighten it in place to hold your vise. Now, obviously there's some differences there. Does it matter which one you pick? Absolutely not. It is a matter of personal preference whether you prefer the base or the C-clamp. Now, are there advantages and disadvantages to each? Yeah, there are. And we'll start with talking about the disadvantages of a pedestal vise. So, the disadvantage of the pedestal vise is whatever surface you set this on, that's the height you're stuck with. So, you're solely dependent on the height of your bench for the height of your jaws. Well, I'm talking about all this height. You may be wondering, well, why is height important? Well, height is important because you're going to be working in this area with your hands. So if your arms are up and in an elevated position and you're tying a lot of flies, let's say maybe 6 dozen or maybe even 4 dozen. 4 dozen, that'd be 48 flies, or 6, that'd be 72, somewhere between 48 and 72 flies. Consecutively for one session, and you've always got your arms up in this position, your arms are going to get tired and your fingers are going to get fatigued, right? Because you don't have as much blood flow going to them. So the height of your vise matters from an ergonomics perspective. The more that your arms are in a natural, comfortable position that you would normally hold them in, the more comfortable you're going to be tying the fly. So that is one disadvantage to the pedestal vise. Now, the great advantage of having a pedestal vise, actually there's 2 great advantages to having the pedestal vise. Number 1 is the obvious one. You can pick it up and set it on any surface that you want to, and you can put it anywhere you want to. So if maybe you like to have the vise close to you, you can just pick it up and set it close to you. Or you needed to have it a little further away, you can pick it up and set it further away from you. Maybe you want to get a quick look at the front of the fly. You can pick it up and turn it. So that's the main advantage there. The second advantage to having the pedestal vise is your portability. So you can set this on any smooth level surface that you choose. You don't have to have a table or a bench that has a lip on the end of it for you to clamp to. You don't have to worry about that. You can just pick it up and set it on the surface and you're ready to tie. So, since I tend to transport my vise a lot, I like having the pedestal because it's more versatile for me to have. But if you like the C-clamp, if you start out with a C-clamp vise, or if you just so happen to like it better, that's fine. That's great. There are advantages to having your C-clamp as well. Obviously, its advantage is that you can adjust where you clamp onto the stem, so you can adjust the height of your vise jaws. So it makes it a little bit easier to set the vise at a height that's comfortable for you to tie at. One disadvantage to having your C-clamp base is that you've got to have a table with a lip on it, or at least some part of it that you're not going to be bumping or hitting any legs or anything like that, so you have a nice smooth surface to clamp to. The other disadvantage to the C-clamp vise is that if you're not careful, you can damage your tying surface. So whether you have if you have a nice piece of furniture like a desk or a bench that has a stained finish on it, you don't necessarily want to have marred places on it or marks on it where you've been attaching and reattaching a C-clamp. So one way that you can eliminate that is to take a piece of felt or foam. This happens to be green felt, and you can just pad the jaws of your C-clamp so it doesn't wear out the surface of your tying bench or your tying table. So I mentioned that there are your traditional vices and your true rotary vise. What I have pictured here is a true rotary vise. And what makes it unique is this spinning feature. It doesn't do anything different as far as how it holds the hook. Now, what you can do is you take your bare hook, and this is pretty much going to be any vise on the market. You've got your adjusting screw up front, and you just back it out enough to where you can get your hook in between the two jaws, and then you use that adjusting screw to tighten up around the bend of the hook, just like I've done there. Now you're not using this, you don't want to over tighten this. You just want to screw it in until it catches the hook and it's in place. You're not using this one to tighten and hold the hook in place. So I mean, it will move around on you if you do that. But basically what you're trying to do is just size those vise jaws up to where they're already going to hold the hook. So if I take my hands off of it, it will hold it. It's just not going to hold it very strong. See, I can just bump it and move it. So once you've done that, the next step is to use your tightening screw down here. And you don't want to over tighten here either, but you kind of want to tighten until it stops. As soon as you feel it stop, that's pretty good right there. And you can see now your hook's not going to go anywhere. It's locked into place, and it's not going to move on you. But I really stress that. Just be careful that you don't over tighten on it, because you could hurt some of the components on your vise jaws, or even worse yet, you can strip this screw out and then you gotta get a new screw if you're lucky. Most of the time you have to buy a new vise jaws, and this comes as a whole assembly, and that's not cheap. This is kind of your most important part of the vise, right? It's what's holding the hook. So just be careful, exercise caution when you're tightening it up. You can see that I can flip on the hook eye and the hook not move, right? That's kind of what you're looking for. Now what makes this vise a true rotary is that it rotates, but watch the hook shank when I rotate. See how it stays in a straight line? I'm going to just true that up just a little bit there. See how it stays in a straight line? That hook shank is in perfect alignment with the axes that passes through the head. Right there. Well, why is this important, you may ask? Well, let's say you're making a woolly bugger, and you've just wrapped the chenille around the hook. Or you're getting ready to wrap, even better yet, you're getting ready to wrap the chenille around the hook. So you've got it tied in. What you can do is just hold on to the chenille and then just rotate this part. It's got a tensioning knob there. I'm going to put a little bit more tension on it. You can just rotate it around, and as you rotate it, it'll wrap the chenille up the hook for you. So you can watch 360 degrees around the entire hook shank of where you're putting that material onto the hook shank. So you can make sure, basically you can make sure that you can put each wrap one right in front of the other with no gaps, no spaces. So it eliminates a little bit of time in that respect, and it gives you adds some quality to your flies. It allows you to tie prettier flies. I mean, you can do the same thing after you've wrapped, on your woolly bugger. After you've wrapped the chenille, the next part's to wrap the hackle. So you can do the same thing with the hackle. You can hold it and wrap it right up the hook shank, and the good thing about that is you can set an angle with the feather, and you can hold that angle and have your hackle wraps evenly placed all the way up to the hook eye, making for a real beautiful fly. Does that mean it's going to catch more fish? Well, unfortunately, that's not guaranteed, but it'll probably catch more fishermen. So your traditional vises are going to have the same basic features that this true rotary vise has. And I'm just going to run through this slide real quick and talk about the different vises pictured here. Starting on the left, you have what's known as a Griffin Vise. And your Griffin Vise is this particular model, anyway, is the most basic model that you can have. You can see that it features a tightening screw, an adjustable screw, and your vise jaws. And then over here it basically has no head at all. It's kind of just vise jaws that are attached with a little thumb screw on the back there that attaches to the stem. So it's fairly simplistic, and that's good when you're first starting out. There's not a lot of parts to it, and it's easy to operate. And you can see that this one is that C-clamp based model that I was talking about. Now notice the stem. The stem has preset notches in it that you can set the height to. So it gives you versatility, right, of some presets that it has, but then if you need to custom adjust it, you can still do that. So this would be a good basic vise, and it's going to hold the hook pretty well, and I don't think you would have any issue with it starting out. Now your next one you see on the pedestal model there, that's a Dyna King Traveler Vise. Now this is an older vise model, and it's been around for some time now, but it's still a Goldie. It still works really well. Now this vise, even though it's not a true rotary vise in definition, it still has a rotating feature. You can still rotate the vise jaws around 360 degrees. Just the thing that you can't do is you can put your hook shank in line with the vise head, but now you're going to be set at an angle. You're not set parallel to your tying surface. You're not set at a zero angle. You're just going to be pitched up ever so slightly, so it can make it hard for wrapping materials and doing that kind of thing. But the advantage it does give you that the Griffin Vise didn't have is that you can see 360 degrees around your fly. And I'm not talking about your zipper fly. I'm talking about the fly in the vise jaws. So yeah, you can rotate it around and get a good clean view of the fly you just tied, or maybe you're up to a specific step and you just want to check and see how that body is looking, or the ribbing or hackle or whatever. And this vise will allow you to do that. So it's not an important feature to have, but it's a nice feature to have. You can see that on this vise that there is no adjusting screw or tightening screw. So that makes this vise unique. And actually what it is you have this cylinder, the black cylinder up there close to the vise jaws, that you actually tighten to tighten up your vise jaws. On this particular model, the vise jaws themselves are kind of like a spring, and then this little collar, this screw collar, tightens down and brings the jaws close together. So an interesting feature, but basically that little collar there, it would be your tightening screw. So you just put the hook in the vise jaws and then tighten it down. Now on the back end, you'll notice that there's a lever. And what this lever does, this isn't a handle so you can rotate around the fly. It's going to have that function too, but it's actually a lever where you can pull, even after you've tightened up here, you can pull the vise jaws through this sleeve and tighten up on your hook even more. So that's kind of how their adjusting and tightening system works there. You got this screw up here first that you're going to use like an adjusting screw and tighten it up on the hook bend, and then activate that lever to pull it in and snug it up even tighter. So very good vise. I've had experience with this one, and I think a lot of it. Now it's called a traveler because it's got that pedestal with it, right? You can getting back to the versatility and portability. You can take this guy anywhere you're going to go and use it on any tying surface, right? So moving on for that, we have a Thompson Model A vise. This is a very popular model. Good entry-level vise as well. You can see that it has the tightening lever on the back like the Dyna King does. And you're going to have another method up here for your hook jaws, or for your vise jaws, for your vise jaws to adjust and tighten accordingly using that lever on the back. And it's also a C-clamp model. Now getting into the next vise, or fourth vise on this little picture. This is an Orbis Premier vise. And there's not much difference here between the other three vices that I've talked about, so I won't really go into much detail about it. But you can see that it's got this pivot point on the stem right underneath the head. And what that allows you to do is set that head angle to any angle that you want. So like you saw on my vise, like my vise is always going to be perfectly flat, 0 degrees, right? I can't do anything to change that. But this vise will actually pitch up or down, depending on your preference, so you can set the jaws exactly where you want them. So that obviously has an advantage there. And this vise will also rotate. So if you wanted to level out the vise jaws to where they're at 0 degrees, and then use the rotating feature, you pretty much got a true rotary vise there. So just something to keep in mind. Another neat little feature there. This vise would probably be more on the higher end of the spectrum in terms of cost, but it's going to do an excellent job of holding the hook, just like the other three vices are going to do an excellent job of holding the hook. Now the last vise is a Regal Vise. Now the Regal Vise has all the features that the Premier Vise has, but here it's got a mechanism on it for adjusting it that is this little gold lever here at the back that you can see. Basically, instead of an adjusting screw that you've actually got to turn and tighten, you just pull on that lever and it springs open the vise jaws, and then you put the hook in there and let it go, and it adjusts to that hook size. Now, just underneath the jaws, and just in behind and underneath the jaws there, you have another tightening screw that allows you to tighten the vise jaws out and lock that hook into place. And this vise also features a pivoting head and a rotating feature. So, very interesting vise, kind of more on the upper end of the spectrum, but just kind of an innovative approach to holding the hook. All these vices that I've talked about today have one thing in common. They're all designed to hold a hook. So that's the most important feature we're looking here. You want a vise that's going to hold the hook so it doesn't move around on you. Just like I've got this one here. It holds the hook strong enough that it's not going to bounce around on me while I tie. Pay attention to that when you search for your vise. You want it to do a good job of holding the hook. And if you're fishing in the southern Appalachians like me, you want to make sure that it'll hold a hook from about a size 1/0 all the way down to a 22 or a 24. So it gives you a pretty good size range from tying flies for trout all the way up to bigger bass flies. So kind of important as far as that goes for your size range on your hook jaws, because as your skills progress, you'll want to tie more specific flies like bass fly patterns or saltwater patterns even, or smaller trout flies. And if your vise has already got that size range, it'll allow you to grow and adapt without having to upgrade to the next level vise. So pay attention to that when you're searching. But by no means do you have to go out and buy the most expensive one that you can find. You definitely don't have to do that. Just pay attention to how the vise holds the hook and how well the vise holds the hook. That's what you're really concerned with here. Well, that about wraps it up for this video. Be sure to check out my other videos. I've got some other videos on fly tying, and some that even show me fishing and talking about other aspects of fly fishing and fly tying. And if you missed the first video in this series, there's also a first video that showcases the tools that you will need in addition to your vise for tying flies. Anyway, as always, if you stuck with me this far, I appreciate it. Be sure to like and subscribe to my channel. Be sure to like this video and some of my other videos if you happen to like the content you see. And be sure to leave me some comments below. I always like to get feedback to make sure I'm putting in the appropriate content and I didn't miss anything, or even just tips for how I can do better. My goal here is to, with this video series, is to reach those of you that are just wanting to get started with fly tying and you don't really know where to begin, or maybe you have an idea of where you want to begin, but you need to see a little bit more of the features, or just know a little bit more about the equipment involved. So yeah, just be sure to like this video, check out my other videos, subscribe to the channel if you like the content, and thanks for watching.